In every age, people have lived as performers on a stage, acting not for themselves, but for the crowd. Today, the stage glows in our hands, endless screens filled with faces imitating one another, chasing approval through likes, hearts, and fleeting numbers. Behind each gesture hides the same hunger, the need to be confirmed, to exist through the eyes of others. Nietzsche saw this long before our digital age. He warned of the herd, the great mass that moves together, not from conviction, but from fear of standing alone. Safety lies in the herd, but never greatness. Comfort comes at the cost of individuality. Modern psychology now proves what Nietzsche already knew. The brain rewards conformity with quick bursts of pleasure, yet the spirit quietly withers under that same reward. And so the question rises, what truly separates the herd from the individual? The herd has always promised safety. In ancient times, survival itself depended upon it. The group offered protection from predators, warmth in the cold, and a shared pool of resources. Evolutionary psychology still reminds us that belonging was once the difference between life and death. Even now, traces of that instinct remain in the nervous system. A frown, a rejection, a laugh at one's expense. These small gestures can ignite the same biological alarm that once warned of exile from the tribe. To be cast out was once fatal, and so the body trembles even when only a reputation is at stake. Nietzsche observed this with severity. He saw that what once guaranteed survival had, in the modern world, become a quiet poison. The herd, he wrote, is not merely a group of people but a mentality, a morality that praises sameness, rewards obedience, and flattens originality into ridicule. What the herd calls virtue is often only conformity. What it calls sin is often only independence. And thus the individual who dares to walk differently is met not with admiration, but suspicion. Modern life offers countless reflections of this truth. Crowds move not only in villages or cities, but through trends, through the rise and fall of popular ideas, through the endless mimicry of digital spaces. A new dance, a new phrase, a new product, adopted not because it is meaningful, but because others have adopted it first. Sociologists call this social contagion, the spread of behavior not by conviction, but by imitation. In the process, individuality is not only silenced, it is forgotten. Yet Nietzsche did not condemn the herd merely for its uniformity. He feared what it does to the human spirit. To exist only by the approval of others is to abandon the deepest responsibility one holds, to become oneself. And this abandonment, he warned, is the true tragedy, a life not lived, but borrowed. Still, Nietzsche did not advise hatred of the herd. He simply urged distance from its spell. The crowd will always move as one. Its power lies in numbers. But the individual's power lies elsewhere, in the capacity to look inward, to respect the self even when the multitude does not. And this leads toward the next question. If the herd diminishes individuality by demanding obedience, what force restores it? For Nietzsche, the answer begins not with applause from the outside, but with a more difficult task: cultivating respect from within. If this content is resonating with you, consider subscribing. I make videos that help you see the world and yourself more clearly. Thank you. If the herd promises safety by stripping individuality, then the first step away from its grasp is not found in rebellion, but in a quieter and more demanding discipline: self-respect. Nietzsche, with his usual severity, declared that even self-contempt is more dignified than bowing before the judgment of others. For in self-contempt, at least one wrestles with the truth of one's own being. In servitude to opinion, one abdicates the struggle altogether. Consider how modern life is filled with small acts of unnecessary submission. An apology whispered where no offense was given. An explanation poured out in fear of seeming impolite. A decision reversed not because it was wrong, but because it might displease another. Each moment seems trivial, yet psychology reveals that repetition engraves habit into the nervous system. Neural pathways strengthen not only for skills and talents, but also for submission. The more one explains oneself without cause, the more the brain expects to do so, until dignity becomes eroded by routine. Nietzsche saw in this a form of slavery, though no chains were visible. The person who depends upon applause lives as a beggar, enslaved to the unpredictable moods of the crowd. And applause is a fickle master. What is celebrated one day becomes ignored the next. What is praised in one circle is mocked in another. To seek stability in such shifting winds is to build a home upon sand. The alternative, though more difficult, is to establish a foundation within, to respect one's own judgment before seeking confirmation from others. Even neuroscience quietly supports this. Studies of self-affirmation show that those who anchor their identity in internal values suffer less from social rejection. The sting of exclusion remains, but it does not unravel them, for they are not living upon borrowed worth. Yet this path demands courage. To respect oneself is not a sentimental gesture, it is an act of defiance against a culture that rewards availability, compliance, and performance. It means risking misunderstanding, risking the accusation of arrogance, risking the silence that follows when one refuses to bow. And here Nietzsche's words cut deeper. He suggested that dignity is not granted by others, but born precisely in those moments when one refuses to seek permission to exist. From this insight emerges the next stage of his thought. For Nietzsche did not stop at self-respect as a defensive stance. He pointed toward something even more audacious, the will to create one's own values, to shape life not merely by refusing the herd, but by daring to build anew. And thus the question shifts. If self-respect liberates a person from the need for applause, what then does one do with this newfound freedom? Nietzsche's answer was the will to power, not as domination over others, but as mastery over oneself. Once self-respect has been wrestled back from the grasp of the herd, Nietzsche turned to the question of what one is meant to do with such freedom. For freedom without direction risks collapsing into emptiness. His answer was the will to power, not in the vulgar sense of controlling others, but as the highest expression of self-mastery, the inner force that compels an individual to shape life according to their own vision. To live by borrowed values is easy. Society provides them in abundance. Career paths laid out like railways, traditions dictating when one should marry, what one should believe, even what one should desire. Yet Nietzsche saw that to follow these tracks without question is to live as a shadow, never touching the substance of one's own existence. The will to power demands something more dangerous, the creation of new values forged in the furnace of one's own experience. Modern psychology offers an echo of this insight. Research on intrinsic motivation reveals that people who pursue goals aligned with their authentic interests, rather than those imposed by external pressures, report higher levels of well-being and resilience. The nervous system itself seems to reward the individual who dares to shape life from within. In contrast, when choices are made only to satisfy external expectations, the brain registers stress, not satisfaction. What Nietzsche grasped through philosophy, neuroscience has begun to trace in circuits of reward and autonomy. Consider the one who chooses an unconventional path, a painter who refuses the security of a respectable career, or an individual who dares to reject traditions that no longer resonate. To the herd, such choices appear reckless, even foolish. Yet for Nietzsche, These are acts of affirmation. They declare that life is not a script to be followed, but a canvas to be painted. Still, this path is not without cost. To create one's own values often means stepping into solitude, enduring misunderstanding, even ridicule. But here lies Nietzsche's provocation. Better to face the loneliness of authenticity than the comfort of conformity. Better to risk failure in one's own voice than to succeed in an echo. The will to power, then, is not about conquest over others, but conquest over inertia, over fear, over the silent temptation to remain within the herd. It is about becoming the author of one's own existence. And yet Nietzsche warned that even this creation is fragile if one secretly longs for validation. For what use is freedom if it is spent chasing the approval of those very crowds one sought to escape? This brings us to the final and most perilous question: the true cost of pleasing others and the slow erosion it brings to authenticity itself. If the will to power calls each individual to create their own values, then the greatest threat to this creation is the quiet disease of pleasing others. Nietzsche saw it with piercing clarity. Those who live only for approval become shallow, resentful, and weary, for their energy flows outward, endlessly drained by the hunger of the crowd. Approval is a currency that never enriches. It only keeps one perpetually poor, because the price is always authenticity itself. The pattern is familiar across ages. A person bends themselves to fit the expectations of family, partner, community, or colleagues. They laugh when they do not find something funny. They agree when their soul protests. They sacrifice their own vision in exchange for the applause of others. But what is the end of this bargain? Modern psychology has begun to answer. Studies on people-pleasing show elevated stress responses, heightened cortisol levels, and an erosion of personal boundaries. The body itself rebels against this servitude, signaling through exhaustion and anxiety that a life lived for others is not a life at all. Nietzsche did not speak of this in the language of hormones and stress, but in terms of spirit. He wrote that the one who constantly seeks to justify and apologize ceases to live from their own center. They become an echo of other people's desires, an actor wearing costumes not of their choosing. And no actor, however skilled, can carry such a role without eventually collapsing beneath its weight. Think of the fatigue that emerges when someone spends years suppressing their own instincts just to be acceptable. At first it may look like harmony, but underneath, resentment grows. Energy that could have been used for creation, for daring, for self-mastery, is wasted on endless performances of likability. The tragedy is not simply exhaustion. It is the loss of what could have been, the unfulfilled potential sacrificed to avoid displeasure. To live for approval is to spend your life in debt, forever paying with pieces of your own soul. Nietzsche's warning was clear. The crowd will applaud your obedience, but it will never honor your individuality. The moment you stop caring what others think, a silence falls. The applause fades. But in that silence, something greater awakens: authenticity, strength, and the will to power. So ask yourself, what is the cost of pleasing others in your own life? And what might return if you abandoned the need for approval altogether? If this speaks to you, let it be written in the comments. I choose authenticity, not as a slogan, but as a declaration that life will no longer be a performance for the crowd. Better to be hated for who you are than loved for what you are not.